Community Church, Unitarian Universalist. I'm your worship associate, and let's just part mine, Sally Jackson. And it is a joy to be with you today. Community Church is a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are in a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of social justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Please look to your weekly email for announcements. And we are delighted to welcome to our pulpit today our guest speaker. And all I have to do is look up the bio, because I don't know him at all. We're just in the choir, and where would we get to meet? Let's just see if anything's going to cooperate today. I should never rely on electronics. It's here. There we go. All right. This is Emma Caverly. Emma is relatively new to Unitarian Universalism and CCUU. Having joined the congregation in 2022, she's found in Community Church a strong sense of community and a supportive environment for one seeking spiritual growth. She's a member of the choir and serves on the worship committee. She will be voting in the statewide election this coming Saturday, October 14th, and she hopes that all of you will make your votes heard as well. She speaks French and has taught English as a second language, and she tries to approach the world with a curious mind. She works as a pastry assistant in a local restaurant. That's the part I find interesting. Actually, the open mind is a good thing, too. Okay. Now, we are going to do our land acknowledgement. So, if you turn to the back of the program, or should I do the announcements first? Now, let's do this, and then we'll do the announcements. Because it doesn't actually say where announcements go. All right, so we're going to do the land acknowledgement and read along the back of the program. We acknowledge and pay tribute to the original inhabitants of this land. The city of New Orleans is a continuation of an indigenous trade route on the Mississippi River, known for thousands of years as Comanche. Tribes that lived on this land include the Caddo, the Natchez, the Choctaw, Chitimacha, Houma, Tunica, Biloxi, and Atkapa, Ishtak, among others. Did I leave everybody behind there or something? No, it says not. Yeah, I read it this time. We'll pull out last week's. I'll do this as a monologue. Okay. We recognize that as a result of broken treaties and involuntary removal, Native Americans were often forced from their lands. We remember and pay respect to the communities impacted by these actions. Native peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and the resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. With gratitude and honor, we acknowledge the indigenous nations that have lived and continue to thrive here. Okay, now we're doing the announcements. We're going to do this. And I'm going to point out to you that the announcements come to you in our weekly newsletter. So be sure you open that. And if you're not getting it, make sure you contact the office and give them your current email address. You can open that and find all the things. We have a few other things we're going to be talking about. And the first one, we're going to bring up Sean to speak. Come on, Sean.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Loeb, for those of you who don't know me. I'm giving a quick update this week for our annual pledge drive. That's the fundraising drive that raises money to keep the church operating. We have this lovely progress meter. Lovely is not really an appropriate word. It's awesome. Crafted by, Overexcited. Crafted by our resident artist, Cynthia Ramirez. Yay! Cynthia, do you want to help me? Back to the microphone. As of this week, our pledge total for 2024 is $81,380. And I'll reiterate, the goal that we're shooting for, although we don't do goals every year, is $100,000. So we could use a little bit of help to make that last push to meet our goal, or maybe get a bit extra, as the latter suggests. We might try. So if you haven't done your pledge and are interested in doing your pledge for the next year, you can talk to me, you can talk to Marianne. We do have the pledge forms here available for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And while we're still talking about the pledge drive and things like that, we're going to bring up another speaker with an announcement. And it is Marcia. You may remember her from previous weeks, as she is our board president.
Hey, so good morning. Good morning. All right, this is my testimonial on why I pledged to CCUU. When I was a kid in the Texas Panhandle, my family attended an evangelical fundamentalist Bible Baptist church. We were so conservative that we thought the Southern Baptists were too liberal. I have a lot of stories about that experience, but I'll save that for another day. I recall first hearing about the Unitarian Church in high school American Lit class when we studied the Transcendentalists. This was about the same time I started questioning in my mind all of the religious indoctrination I had been brought up with. Emerson, Thoreau, and the wise May Alcott sounded pretty cool to me, but I didn't get to actually experience a Unitarian service until I had graduated from college, moved to Houston, and attended a Unitarian church there with a friend who was a member. This was 1974. I attended church there for several months until I met my future husband, who was Catholic, and I started going to Mass with him. Romance always wins out. I eventually converted to Catholicism and raised my daughters in the Catholic Church even after their dad and I divorced. But let's fast forward to 1997, when I learned of a new UU church that had just started out not far from where I lived in far west Houston. So I decided to give UUism another try. After attending services for 2 Sundays, I joined the church, and I have never looked back. I came to New Orleans in 2020, shortly after the pandemic hit, to help my daughter with the grandkids. Since everything was in lockdown, I was churchless for a year and a half. I had been regularly checking CCUU's website, and as soon as I saw that in-person services were going on, I made my first service here. As soon as I walked into this sanctuary, I knew this is where I wanted to be. It was so lovely and peaceful here, and Nicholas's music ensnared me. This was in February of 2022. I became a member in May of that year, and shortly thereafter, when Reverend Jacqueline asked me to be a member of the board, I accepted. And now today, I'm standing here in this pulpit telling you what you mean to me. Joining this church has brought me wonderful new friends. It has given me the chance to make music on a regular basis, and I am able to experience weekly the fellowship with people who think progressively and care about the issues that are important to me. I want this church to be able to continue for a long, long time, so that many more people will be able to experience the joy that I've found here. To cut to the chase, I make donations to other well-deserving groups because I believe in being charitable and sharing the abundance that I've been given. But I view my financial support of this church differently. I do not see it as charitable giving, but my financial pledge to this church is an investment into my happiness and spiritual well-being. Thank you.
One more announcement. This is from Michelle. You may recognize her since she's often up here with the choir.
I'm going to talk about a different kind of pledging. So I've talked about this a couple of times before in the last month or so. If you have not, I got a list Friday of the people who from this congregation who have pledged so far. And we have a goal of 60. We're only at 15 so far. And this is pledging for not just the primary election, but also the general election next month. If you have not taken the pledge yet, please raise your hand and take out your phone. The ushers will pass out some cards to anybody who hasn't pledged yet. Now, this is the idea. Not only to pledge on behalf of ourselves, but also to get friends and family members to pledge to vote. And that's why the number is 60 and not 30. So please try to get at least 1, 2, or more people to pledge. So if you have your phone out, please scan this QR code. And I don't see any phones out. Okay, or fill it out by paper and give it to me afterwards, or it's huge. Okay, so this is from Together Louisiana. When you pledge, you'll be helping us build a big, nonpartisan voting bloc to bring about change in our community and throughout the state. So let's see how we're doing. If you took the pledge online today or earlier with me, okay, if you've already pledged, raise your hand. Okay, so a few people have already pledged. And if not, please fill out your cards or scan the QR code. It just literally takes 30 seconds to do it online. And that's it. Please help us get to our goal of 60. Thanks.
And now we're going to have the opening words, and they will be from Camille.
Our opening words come from Frederick Douglass in The Nation's Problem, although I first came across these words in the book, How the Word is Passed. Our past was slavery. We cannot recur to it with any sense of complacency or composure. The history of it is a record of stripes, a revelation of agony. It is written in characters of blood. Its breath is a sigh, its voice a groan, and we turn from it with a shudder. The duty of today is to meet the questions that confront us with intelligence and courage.
And now we come to our custom of lighting the chalice to invoke hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join us in singing the words of the chalice light. We light this flame. The words are printed in your order of service. director, Cynthia Ramirez, will share her words for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Today I'm going to share with you a story called Ellen's Broom. Sunday morning, Ellen sat on the front pew with her family. She wiggled on the wooden seat, trying to get comfortable. But she knew not to say a word. Her people no longer had to worship at the back of the Methodist church or sneak to the woods for prayer meetings. Slavery days were over. They had so much to be thankful for. Ellen heard something new in the voices that swelled the church, built by her own with singing. They were free. Joy filled her heart. And then Deacon stood to speak. He clutched a paper and raised it to heaven. God be the glory, he roared. All former slaves living as husband and wife shall be registered and seen as married in the eyes of the law. All over the church, people leaped to their feet. Ellen did too. She understood only a little of what the preacher said, but she knew it was good. Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears. Her papa's hands clapped like thunder. Back home in their cabin, Ellen's parents walked over the broom hanging on the wall. Mama always said it was part of the family, a witness to the way things were. She took the broom story over and over so she would never forget that they survived. Ruby and Reuben, Mama asked the twins, do you know what the broom was for? Weddings, Mama, Reuben answered quickly. That's right, Mama said, nodding. Broom weddings of all most slaves were allowed to have. Before freedom came, the law wasn't on our side, Papa said. Husbands and wives could be ripped apart, sold away at any time. It didn't matter if you cried or even begged to stay together. Master had the final say. As Ellen thought about her parents' words, she tried to imagine life without them. Her eyes burned and her heart ached. That's not right, she said, shaking her head and trying to clear the image from her mind. But we did the best we could with what we had, Papa said. Deacon said a few words. Then we put these here broom on the ground, held hands, and leaped into life together. We were married in our hearts and in God's eyes, Mama said, but we have no way to show it. That's all changed now. We can be married legal, just like everybody else. A couple of weeks later, when the sun peeked its rosy head into the sky, Mama said it was time for the journey. Ellen washed and dressed quickly. Ruby grinned and carried baby Noah on her hip. Reuben toted a sack of food. Mama took down the broom and handed it to Ellen. This broom was there from the start. It should come along too, don't you think? She said with a wink. Ellen felt her chest puff up with pride. She smiled and clutched the broom tight. As they walked to the courthouse, people from church going for the same reason joined them. Ellen looked around the parade of strutting families and her parents holding hands. She listened to the sweet laughter and songs sailing in the air. She held the broom tight. They stopped at a beautiful building near a row of flowers. Papa bowed his head and gave thanks that they arrived safely. Ellen's eyes grew large as they stepped inside. A Freeman's Bureau officer interviewed a couple in the line in front of them. He wrote the man's and lady's names on a special registry. Rudy said they were already married, but part of that record was proof that they were legally husband and wife. Ellen looked at the woman's pretty dress and at Mama's plain one made of homespun cotton. She grabbed Ruby's arm and hurried her out the room. "Where are you taking me, Ellen?" her big sister said. "I have an idea," Ellen said as her eyes twinkled. "Did you see the patch of flowers outside?" Ruby nodded and a smile came across her face. The sisters ran out and carefully plucked some flowers. Then they weaved them through the straw until the broom was decorated with blooms of red and pink. I have to show you. Yay! Okay. In the courthouse, Ellen handed the broom to Mama, flower side up. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "What's wrong, Mama?" Ellen asked, worried she had done something bad. "Nothing, baby," she said. "Everything is just right." The man added Papa's and Mama's name to the registry. Then he asked them for the year that they started living together as husband and wife and the names and ages of their children. Ellen grinned when Papa said hers. When the man finished writing, he explained that Mama and Papa were married in the eyes of God and the law. He handed them a certificate to take home. Papa kissed Mama and whirled her in the air like a new bride. On the way home, the family stopped for lunch beneath a shade tree. Ellen picked up the broom and laid it in front of her parents. I want to see you jump the broom. Please, can you?" Papa frowned. "Broom jumping is the past, little bit. We're married, officially." "Please, Papa," Ellen said. "Mama always says the broom is part of us, too." "Papa's right," Mama said. "The broom is the past." Ellen hung her head. "But you're right, too," Mama said. "It will always be part of who we are. Come on, Papa. Let's show them young folks how it's done." And they jumped the broom. "When I get married one day, I'm going to jump the broom too," Ellen said suddenly. Papa hesitated. Then he grinned. "That would be mighty fine, little bit," he said. "Mighty fine." When they returned to the cabin, Mama looked at the bare wall and then at Ellen. "That wall could use some fixing up," she said. Ellen knew just what it needed. As the last rays of the light warmed the room, she smiled and she hung up the certificate and the broom together. The end. So let's sing the children, wherever they may be, out for religious education.
This is a sacred time of joys and sorrows. If you're online, you may write your joys and sorrows in the comments section to be read aloud in person. You may write them on one of the cards being passed out by our greeters. Or feel free to come up to the microphone and share your joys or sorrows. Now you can please remain seated while we sing our hymn number 95, "There Is More Love Somewhere." It's a joy to have, oh, great, I was where I can't read. To welcome our great niece, Celine Soldier, okay, into our families and our family's loving embrace. Jim and Vera O'Neill, I'm sorry, you're using cursive, they haven't taught that in years. I'm far too young to read cursive. Okay, I should move away from the lightning strike. Okay, there's a sorrow. Heard earlier in the news about the Hamas attack yesterday. Made me very sad that another full-blown conflict may happen in the Middle East. And that one has no signature on it. There's another sorrow, the war between Israel and Hamas. And that's from Joy of the Weather. Oh, that's the Joy of the Weather, not from Joy of the Weather. Okay, I've been in radio too long. Everybody has a nickname. It's Joy of the Weather. No, the Joy is the Weather. Very nice. Okay. I would like to light a candle to celebrate the 1960 graduates, Fortier High School, now the Willow School, who celebrated their 80th birthdays at a reunion this weekend, and that's from Marilyn Malone. All right. Marilyn and Alan had a brunch for Marilyn's high school class yesterday, and Nicholas Yetta did an excellent job of providing the live music. It's indeed a joy and hardly a surprise. It's a joy to have, that's the first one, I'm sorry, but it is still a joy, right? Okay. We're going to light 2 more candles.
Wait a minute.
Oh, is there somebody? Oh, you're sneaking up on me from the side. Okay, Joel.
I have a sorrow to pass on. Those of you that have been around for a fair while may remember Cheryl Stevens.
Yes.
She passed away just recently.
Oh.
She was a longtime faculty member at Xavier, and when she and Ed moved north, she became a dean at Western Kentucky University. Don't know any of the details, but Teresa Birdwhistle was a colleague of hers and also a former attendee of this church, contacted me the other day and asked me to pass on the sad news. That's about all that I know.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Now I remember this part. Are there any others? You have one here?
Yes.
Come on up.
Good morning, I'm Henry McCarthy, and my joy is that on Wednesday, our son Jermaine and his wife Catherine gave birth to Maisie Helen McCarthy, our first grandchild.
It's always nice to end on a joy. And now, we're going to light 2 more candles. One for the joy still bubbling up, 2 new to share, and one for the sorrows that we cannot yet put into words. Know that we hold you in our hearts. Community Church Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. Members and friends' generosity help us do the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can give online at ccunola.org/stewardship or by text at 504-370-2659. Text GIVE. And you can give in person this morning. It's our custom to give 50% of our plate to the cause our congregation and social justice ministry support. Anybody know what we're supporting today? We don't have one today. Wouldn't you know? Okay, well, we won't be supporting anybody specific, we'll be supporting the entire community. All right, and now we remain seated while we sing the offertory, number 315, This Old World.
Our first reading comes from Black Reconstruction in America by W.E.B. Du Bois, which was first published in 1935. As such, references to today refer to the 1930s, and the language is reflective of the era in which it was written. Excerpts from the propaganda of history. We have too often a deliberate attempt so to change the facts of history that the story will make pleasant reading for Americans. The editors of the 14th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica asked me for an article on the history of the American Negro. From my manuscript, they cut out all my references to Reconstruction. I insisted on including the following statement. White historians have ascribed the faults and failures of Reconstruction to Negro ignorance and corruption. But the Negro insists that it was Negro loyalty and the Negro vote alone that restored the South to the Union, established the new democracy both for white and black, and instituted the public schools. This, the editor refused to print. Although he said that the article otherwise was, quote, in my judgment and in the judgment of others in the office, an excellent one, and one with which it seems we may all well be satisfied. I was not satisfied and refused to allow the article to appear. War, and especially civil strife, leave terrible wounds. It is the duty of humanity to heal them. It was therefore soon conceived as neither wise nor patriotic to speak of all the causes of strife and the terrible results to which sectional differences in the United States had led. And so, first of all, We minimized the slavery controversy which convulsed the nation from the Missouri Compromise down to the Civil War. On top of that, we passed by Reconstruction with a phrase of regret or disgust. But are these reasons of courtesy and philanthropy sufficient for denying truth? It is propaganda like this that has led men in the past to insist that history is lies agreed upon, and to point out the danger in such misinformation. It is indeed extremely doubtful if any permanent benefit comes to the world through such action. Nations reel and stagger on their way. They make hideous mistakes. They can commit frightful wrongs. They do great and beautiful things. And shall we not best guide humanity by telling the truth about all this, so far as the truth is ascertainable? Here in the United States, we have a clear example. It was morally wrong and economically retrogressive to build slavery in the United States in the 18th century. We know that now perfectly well, and there were many Americans, North and South, who knew this and said it in the 18th century. Today, in the face of a new slavery established elsewhere in the world under other names and guises, we ought to emphasize this lesson of the past. Moreover, it is not well to be reticent in describing the past. Our histories tend to discuss American slavery so impartially that in the end, nobody seems to have done wrong and everybody was right. Slavery appears to have been thrust upon unwilling, helpless America, while the South was blameless in becoming its center. The difference of development North and South is explained as a sort of working out of cosmic, social, and economic law. No one can read that first thin autobiography of Frederick Douglass and have left many illusions about slavery. And if truth is our object, no amount of flowery romance and personal reminiscences of its protected beneficiaries can keep the world from knowing that slavery was a cruel, dirty, costly, and inexcusable anachronism, which nearly ruined the world's greatest experiment in democracy. No serious and unbiased student can be deceived by the fairy tale of a beautiful Southern slave civilization. One is astonished in the study of history at the recurrence of the idea that evil must be forgotten, distorted, skimmed over. We must not remember that Daniel Webster got drunk, but only remember that he was a splendid constitutional lawyer. We must forget that George Washington was a slave owner, or that Thomas Jefferson had mulatto children, or that Alexander Hamilton had Negro blood, and simply remember the things we regard as creditable and inspiring. The difficulty, of course, with this philosophy is that history loses its value as an incentive and example. It paints perfect men and noble nations, but it does not tell the truth. The most magnificent drama in the last 1,000 years of human history is the transportation of 10 million human beings out of the dark beauty of their mother continent into the newfound El Dorado of the West. They descended into hell, and in the 3rd century they arose from the dead, in the finest effort to achieve democracy for the working millions which this world had ever seen. It was a tragedy that beggared the Greek. It was an upheaval of humanity like the Reformation and the French Revolution. Yet, we are blind and led by the blind. We discern in it no part of our labor movement, no part of our industrial triumph, no part of our religious experience. Before the dumb eyes of 10 generations of 10 million children, it is made a mockery of and spit upon, a degradation of the Eternal Mother, a smear at human effort, with aspiration and art deliberately and elaborately distorted. And why? Because in a day when the human mind inspired to a science of human action, a history and psychology of the mighty effort of the mightiest century, we fell under the leadership of those who would compromise with truth in the past in order to make peace in the present and guide policy in the future. Please rise as you are willing and able and join in singing our hymn number 150, All Whose Boast It Is. That's hymn number 150. Our second reading needs just a little bit of background. It comes from the book How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. It's a wonderfully written, very accessible book about the history of slavery in this country and how that history is remembered. In each chapter, the author, who is a black man, visits a different place that is significant to the history of American slavery. This reading is an excerpt from the chapter about Blandford Cemetery, which is one of the largest Confederate cemeteries in the country. During one visit to Blandford, he observed an event organized by the Sons of the Confederate Veterans. So much of the story we tell about history is really the story that we tell about ourselves, about our mothers and our fathers and their mothers and their fathers, as far back as our lineages will take us. Throughout our lives, we are told certain stories, and they are stories that we choose to believe, stories that become embedded in our identities in ways we are not always fully cognizant of. For many of the people I met at Blandford, the story of the Confederacy is the story of their home, of their family, and the story of their family is the story of them. So when they are asked to reckon with the fact that their ancestors fought a war to keep my ancestors enslaved, there is resistance to facts that have been documented by primary sources and contemporaneous evidence. They are forced to confront the lies they have upheld. They are forced to confront the flaws of their ancestors. As Greg Stewart, a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, told the New York Times in the aftermath of the 2015 Charleston massacre, You're asking me to agree that my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents were monsters. Accepting such a reality would, for them, mean a deterioration of a narrative that has long been part of their lineage, and the disintegration of so much of who they believe themselves to be in the world. But as I think of Blandford, I'm left wondering if we are all just patchworks of the stories we've been told. What would it take? What does it take for you to confront a false history, even if it means shattering the stories you have been told throughout your life, even if it means having to fundamentally re-examine who you are and who your family has been? Just because something is difficult to accept doesn't mean you should refuse to accept it. Just because someone tells you a story doesn't make that story true. Will the truth set us free? About 5 years ago, I attended a family reunion for my grandfather's family. It was in Houma, which is where the family's from. If you aren't familiar, Houma is about an hour southwest of here. People who know me well can tell you that I am sometimes a little disorganized with details. So, true to form, I did not actually ask for the address until the morning of the event. And so it came about that I learned at nearly the last possible moment that we would be having a family reunion at a plantation. I was caught off guard and a little alarmed. It turned out that the organizers of this reunion were looking for a large outdoor pavilion that would accommodate our group if, say, 200 people decided to attend, but would still be affordable if we only had 50. I have a very large extended family. The place that they were able to find in Houma was at Southdown Plantation, which is today a museum. They have a large pavilion on the property, much like a shelter that you might find in a public park. With this new information about the motivation for choosing the location, I no longer felt quite so alarmed. I chose to set aside any lingering feelings of discomfort and prepared to spend the day with a mix of relatives that I knew well and relatives who I had never met. When I arrived at the reunion, my older relatives were very excited. You see, in talking to the people who run the Southdown Plantation and Museum, the organizers had figured out the day before the reunion that their grandfather, my great-grandfather, had actually lived at the plantation in the big house as a young man in the 1920s. He stayed there with his great aunt when he first moved from New Orleans to Houma. So of course we took the tour. The tour guide opened with something like this. The miners bought Southdown Plantation in Terrebonne Parish in 1828. They came from Natchez, Mississippi. By 1847, there were 203 slaves on the property. When they bought Southdown, the plantation house had not been built yet. The slaves built the house when the weather was too bad to work in the fields. And that is how I learned that my great-grandfather's great-grandfather, William J. Miner, was a slave owner. I've been thinking about it for 5 years, and I have yet to figure out what kind of weather in South Louisiana would be too bad for field work, but appropriate weather for construction work.
Wow.
I have started looking for more details about my ancestor, William Miner. So far, I have learned that he owned 4 plantations, 3 in Louisiana, 1 in Mississippi. In the year 1860, he owned 566 slaves altogether. 566 people held in bondage. 566 souls. And that is just a snapshot. Every year some were born while others died. People were bought and sold. How many people were enslaved by members of my family? I don't know yet. I'm still looking. Learning that my ancestors were slave owners was an uncomfortable experience for me. It's an experience that I have thought about often in the years since. I'm still trying to work out what my relationship is with this information. But I am glad that I had that experience, because I didn't realize how I had avoided asking that question. You know the one. Did my ancestors enslave other people? It's not that I was ever confident that they didn't. If you had asked me before I learned the truth, I might have said, I don't know, maybe, probably, I hope not. That last one is naive at best, because I did know that my family goes back pretty far in Louisiana, and I knew that at least some of my ancestors were wealthy. No one was wealthy in antebellum Louisiana without close connections to slavery. The entire Southern economy was built on slavery. So why didn't I know? Because we never talked about it. Why didn't we talk about it? Because my mom didn't know. No one ever talked about it when she was growing up. I wonder if my grandfather knew. It is too late for me to ask him. Surely his father must have known. He lived in the place where it happened, with someone who witnessed it. Did they ever talk about it? I want to say this about the family that I know today. Many of them are people of genuine faith, and I see in them people trying to make choices that make the world a better place. We may not all have the exact same understanding of what is necessary to achieve racial justice in our society, but we do agree that racial justice is essential, and that the imperative for it comes from the recognition that human dignity is inherent to all people. When I was little, my mom used to say, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. This is usually in the context of telling my siblings and I to stop saying mean things to one another. This is great advice to live by. And I believe that the world would be a kinder place if more people followed it. However, I now question the limits of living by that rule. What truths have been lost in the service of being nice over several generations? I can't talk about this not knowing without talking about the lost cause. It is described in how the word is passed in this way. The lost cause is a movement that gained traction in the late 19th century that attempted to recast the Confederacy as something predicated on family, honor, and heritage rather than what it was, a traitor's effort to extend and expand the bondage of Black people. The movement asserted that the Civil War was not actually about slavery, that soldiers and generals who fought in the war were honorable men who did so simply for their families and communities, not because of any racist antagonism. There are two parts to telling an effective lie. One is concocting the false tale of what happened. The other is hiding the evidence of the truth. In order to spin the tale that slave states were a noble nation based on honor, family, and duty, it was necessary to suppress or discredit the testimony of the people who had experienced the horrors of slavery. In order to claim that the Civil War was about something other than slavery, it was necessary to ignore the words of Confederate political leaders, the declarations of secession, and the Constitution of the Confederate States, which all explicitly state that the purpose of seceding from the Union was to preserve the institution of slavery. In order to claim that racist antagonism was not a significant motivator, it is necessary to forget the pattern of unspeakable violence against Black people after the Civil War. New Orleans, 1866. St. Bernard Parish, 1868. Opelousas, 1868. Colfax, 1873. New Orleans again in the so-called Battle of Liberty Place in 1874. Coshada, 1874. Thibodaux, just right next to Houma, 1887. And those are just in Louisiana. In short, the agricultural economy of the South was built on a system of chattel slavery. From 1619 to 1865, a system of laws was developed and expanded to deprive millions of people their innate, God-given rights to self-determination, bodily autonomy, and free will. Between the end of Reconstruction and the civil rights successes of the 1950s and 60s, formerly enslaved people and their descendants were systematically denied of their basic human rights through both legal segregation and extra-legal terrorism. This is one way of summarizing our past, and I think it is largely reflective of the truth. But there is something missing. Ownership. Personal connection. I could be talking about anywhere in the world. It sounds far away, long ago, someone else, somewhere else. It doesn't sound like my story. On one level, it's not my story. All of these things happened before I was born. Most of it happened before my parents were born. Let me tell you a different story about a different part of American history. My grandparents grew up during the Depression. In Michigan, my grandmother's family on my dad's side struggled significantly. My grandmother wrote down some of the memories she had of her childhood, so I know a little bit about what she went through. She was one of 8 children. They lost their home, her father went blind, they depended on the charity of a nearby monastery to have a roof over their heads. Their family worked exceptionally hard just to put food on the table. When I read her words, I feel inspired by their resilience and more connected to the hardships that so many Americans experienced during the Great Depression. Never forget that slavery is not just Black history. Black people did not enslave themselves. Slavery is also white history. It is American history. And it is my family history. It is personal. Instead of talking about our history of slavery and racial oppression with words that sound far away, long ago, somewhere else, someone else, we need to remember that it was not that long ago, and many of us have personal connections to this chapter in our history. It is an uncomfortable and often painful process to reflect on the role of one's ancestors in the ugliest moments of our past. I encourage you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It is well understood that the vast majority of Black Americans are descended from people who were enslaved in this country. It is also a common claim that slave ownership was largely limited to a handful of wealthy elites. It is true that, according to the 1860 census, only 1.4% of the total free population are listed as slaveholders. But there are problems with that statistic. First, it includes the population of free states, in addition to slave states. It makes more sense to only look at the population of slave states. Second, what about the families of slaveholders? Wouldn't you consider the spouses and children of the head of household to be slaveholders in a practical and social sense, in a moral sense? Even if they were not slaveholders in a legal sense? I would. By comparing the number of slaveholders to the number of households, we can estimate that in 1860, 26% of families owned slaves in the slave states, 31% in the future Confederacy. In Louisiana, it was 29% of families enslaved people. Mississippi led the pack with 49% of families owning slaves. 31% seems like a lot more than a handful of wealthy elites. What are the odds that some of your ancestors were among the 31%? Maybe you know that they were. Maybe they were, but you don't know. And maybe you aren't descended from slaveholders. Maybe you can trace your lineage back to Ireland or Italy or Greece in the late 19th century. Or maybe it was your parents who came to this country. Or maybe it was you. Even so, if you have friends and neighbors who have personal connections to slavery, is it really so far away? There's this statue in the sculpture garden at City Park that has always intrigued me. It depicts, if you've been there, you've probably seen it. It depicts a human figure with another human figure squatting on his shoulders and covering the first one's eyes. It continues upwards in the same fashion with a third figure covering the eyes of the second, and so on. The people get smaller and smaller as they go up until you can't quite tell where one ends and the next begins. The name of this piece is Karma, by the artist Doho Su. The law of karma in Buddhism is the law of cause and effect. Every action, every choice has an effect, not only on the wider world, but also on the soul of the actor. As we go through life, these effects on our souls shape the way we react to events in the future. Through reincarnation, a person starts life not as a blank slate, but with some disposition to respond to the world in a certain way. I find the representation of karma in that statue to be fascinating. A person enters life, maybe lives out all their days, blinded by the actions and choices of their past lives. I think it's also a really useful image for understanding our society and our families. How have the actions and choices of those who came before us shaped our understanding of the world we live in? To what extent are we, in the words of Clint Smith, just patchworks of the stories we've been told? I don't believe that any of us is doomed to be forever trapped, forever blinded by the misconceptions learned in childhood. It takes effort, but we can take steps to take off the blindfold and discover something that is closer to the truth. When you learn about American slavery from school, from books, from museums, from conversations, ask if there is an echo of the lost cause in the story you have been told. After the Civil Rights Movement, great strides were made in removing the most pernicious lies from textbooks. But it is one thing to remove the lie. It is another to replace it with the truth. Recent projects have made accessible stories that were once ignored and forgotten. The Whitney Plantation has revolutionized the way the story of plantation life is told by focusing on the experience of slaves. The groundbreaking 1619 Project traces the history of slavery and its legacy using the words of historians, authors, and poets. Even so, there is resistance to hearing from new points of view. Florida and Texas have both passed laws to ban the use of any part of the 1619 Project in public schools, as part of a broader effort to restrict the way that slavery is taught in school. There's a lot of fear surrounding the prospect of an honest accounting of our past. Many people argue that further discussing the pain of the past will only serve to reinforce divisions. However, reflecting on our past need not be divisive. It can be healing. I am not proud to be descended from slaveholders. It is a shameful history. But I don't feel guilty about it either. And my goal today is not for you to leave here burdened by guilt. It is natural to feel guilt, anger, distress, or sorrow. when learning about the true nature of slavery. Take the time to feel those emotions and sit with them, to process what you have learned. Then, find your own path forward. How can you bear witness to the truth? Whether it is in conversations with family or friends, educating the next generation, or in fighting laws that seek to obscure our history. It is true that we cannot change the past, but we can change how it is remembered. In the words of Clint Smith, the history of slavery is the history of the United States. It is not peripheral to our founding, it was central to it. It is not irrelevant to our contemporary society, it created it. This history is in our soil, it is in our policies, and it must too be in our memories. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.
I'm getting a call, and it's telling me it's time to extinguish our chalice. So let's do that. We extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way to somewhere together.
For a closing hymn, we will be singing Bring Out the Festal Bread, which is hymn number 220 in the hymnal. And for our benediction, I will reflect on some of its words. Bring Out the Festal Bread is a song of celebration. It is also a call to action. In the words, shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom, we celebrate the successes of emancipation, the civil rights movement, and the changing hearts of so many people. But when we sing, chains still there are to break, their days are not finished, metal or subtle made, they're still not diminished. Remember that the work of freedom is not done. Hold in your hearts those who are still bound by invisible chains, by ignorance, by hatred, by poverty. Let us go forth with joy for what has been accomplished and with determination to do work that has yet to be done.